Chapter 5. Wednesday late afternoon. Mac eyed her as she opened the door. "Why are you so flustered?" He bent to pet Muggs and Goliath at his feet. "I had the alarms on," she said. "I had to run downstairs and shut it off before you opened the door." His eyebrows shot up. "Are you keeping them on, even when you're home?" He seemed a bit worried. "I will until the antiques are picked up," she said. "I can't take the chance of something happening to those pieces." He nodded. "I guess I can understand that." She led the way back up to the bedrooms, the animals dashing ahead of them. When he stepped into the master bedroom, he whistled. "Wow. That bed is even bigger than I remembered it." "Right. I moved the mattresses to the floor, and now it looks even more crowded. Look at the size of that bed frame. It's huge." He shook his head. "I'm not even sure how they'll take it apart." "Well, someone got it in here somehow," she said. "Although I may have to ask Nan about that." "I'd say so. She might have a trick or two," he said. "What is it you want lifted?" She pointed to the bed. Just then Muggs wiggled underneath the frame again to the same slat, sat and growled. Goliath hopped on top and swatted him. Thaddeus was on top of the bedpost staring down at them. Doreen pointed. "Something is underneath the bed right there by Muggs." Mac groaned, reached down with one hand, then bent his knees, lifting the bed frame. Doreen dove underneath beside Muggs, who shoved his snout right at her. She checked all the other slats first. "Nothing else is here, but whatever this is, I don't know if I'll get it off." He lifted the frame a bit higher. "Why don't you come out and grab those 2 chairs or the boxes you've got here, and we'll put the edge of this frame on them. The ceiling and the 4 posters to this bed won't allow me to lift this any higher." Following his instructions, she propped up the frame on the boxes she was collecting for Goodwill and the consignment shop. He tested the weight. "It's not supremely safe, but it'll be fine for a few minutes." Then he crouched under the bed and took a look. "It looks like a letter's been taped to the slat inside some plastic. Likely to protect the paper over the years." He pulled out a pocket knife from his pants pocket and very carefully slid it in the top layer of plastic, just enough so he could pull out the letter. Once it was free, he handed it to her. At that point Muggs laid down under the propped-up bed. Goliath had dug his claws into wood and had slid until he was stretched out fully. She opened it and gasped. "It's from my great-great-grandmother. It's a letter to Nan's mother. I think. Nan was named after her mom, so they both share the name Willa. Another thing I'll have to clarify with Nan. My dearest granddaughter Willa," Doreen read aloud. "I'm hoping you'll have my passion for antiques. I'm not sure why so many have absolutely no love of things old and well-loved. This entire set is for you. I know what it's worth, and so do you. I also know it doesn't matter to you. Enjoy it in the spirit it was intended, and know that it's listed in my will. But should there ever be any contention, keep this letter with the bed so all will know it's yours. With all my love and the hope that you have an absolutely wonderful and fulfilling life, Nan." Tears were in Doreen's eyes when she stopped reading. She held her hand over her mouth and looked up at Mac. "So does that mean you don't want to sell it now?" he asked dryly. She gave a shake of her head. "No, that's not what I mean. Obviously, I'm not in a position to argue about the need for the sale, and the furniture is really not my style. But to think a piece of my own personal history is here, that's so important." He pointed to the date. "And look at that. Wow, 1909, she read. "Nan wasn't even alive then," she said. He shrugged. "Makes sense to me." "Wow," she repeated. "And she passed it on to my Nan. Just wow." She shook her head. "I want photos of this letter. Take photographs, and if you can scan it, then do that too." Doreen went downstairs to her printer and scanned the letter, then took a photograph of it with her phone too. She walked back upstairs smiling. This is really great. It's also huge for proving provenance, Mac said. Yes, Doreen said with a smile. Nan is 75-ish, and her mother would have been at least 20 or 30 years older. I don't know if you've had a chance to find the paperwork for any of this, but this gives you a specific date to go by. Mac turned to look at the bed frame. Are you ready for me to put the letter back in? She nodded. He carefully reinserted it into the plastic sleeve, where it had been kept safe all these years. Now you can tell your auction house guy that you have that letter. Maybe send him a copy by email. She nodded and immediately sent a text. Then, through her email function on her phone, she attached a copy of the letter and sent it off. She sniffled back her tears. I can't wait to show this to Nan. Sounds like Nan has always been used as the name for the grandmothers in your family, hasn't it? Doreen nodded. With his help, she removed the boxes tilting up the bed frame and helped him lower the massive bed frame to the floor. She moved the boxes back to where they had been. Mac looked at her. What are in all those boxes? She motioned toward the closet, both of its doors open, revealing the mess inside. I'm slowly sorting through all of Nan's clothes. The boxed up stuff here will go to Goodwill. I have all the bags of clothing downstairs that will go to the consignment store. Items I'm keeping currently are in the spare bedroom closet. He nodded. That sounds like a good system with all the sorting to do here. And I'm glad to hear you're keeping some of Nan's clothing too. You might as well wear them since it's expensive to replace it all. He motioned at the overstuffed closet. Still a ton is in this closet alone. Speaking of which, she said, suddenly remembering what else she'd caught sight of in the back of the closet. An old bookshelf is in the closet. It's jammed in the back. Who knew a closet could be this deep? He looked at her in surprise. She pushed all the hangers to one side and pointed it out to him. He shook his head. Do you want me to pull that out for you? She looked at him in delight. Absolutely I do. You should send pictures to your appraiser. Didn't you show him this piece? No, it's not one of the pieces he was looking for. She removed more hanging clothes to give him access. Then stepped in and quickly dumped the contents of the shelf onto the floor under the hangers. A temporary solution at best. I will send Scott photos though. And he can check it out when he returns to pack up this stuff. It took a bit of maneuvering, but finally Mac dragged the bookshelf along the carpeted floor out to where Doreen could access to it. It didn't resemble the other pieces in any way. It was also scratched and beaten up some. Can you imagine, she said, that it's been in there for probably 50 years? Probably since Nan moved in. He nodded. And with the passage of time and too many possessions, it got buried in the back. Still, it's quite usable, lots of life in it yet. It's pretty amazing, she said. Nan seems to think nothing of leaving all this stuff behind. I think she left it behind for a very specific reason, and she was more than happy to share this with you, he said. She smiled. Maybe. I just hadn't expected it. No, he said, but it's all good. I think you're doing the right thing. She appreciated that. I have to admit that it does wake me up in the night. I feel like I'm letting my family down. Not at all, he said. I think the worst thing you can do is hang on to things out of guilt, or because you think it's the right thing to do. I think it's time for you to do what's right for you. She beamed at him. You know what? Honestly, it's been a pretty good week so far. No kidding, he said. Yesterday certainly made it a great week. That was a very good thing you did. But it wasn't necessarily what I did. She hated to feel guilty about it. I mean, really anybody could have sorted that out. The difference is, he said, at the time we didn't have most of the technology we do now. And that cold case hadn't been reopened because nothing new had been added in the way of facts or evidence or witness statements. We would have eventually reviewed it before boxing it up and putting it aside, but that's just the facts of life. You came at it from a very different angle, and you solved it. It was the license plate, she said. He nodded. That makes sense. And that's when we got that needed pop on the case. However, we didn't have time to take another look because you'd solved the case already. She beamed at him. Praise from you is high praise indeed. Have you made another omelet yet? She shook her head. I haven't had time, she confessed. And I'm scared to. I figured that was beginner's luck. He chuckled. I haven't had dinner. If you haven't touched the ingredients, there's probably enough for another one. I suggest you try again, and we'll split it again. She looked at him in surprise, then the nearby clock. It really was dinner time. I haven't touched anything. Do you think it's all still good? She looked at him anxiously. That's another thing I don't know anything about. How long does food keep? 4 to 5 days for sure, he said. Come on. Let's take a look. Downstairs again, they walked into the kitchen, and Mac opened the fridge. He pulled out the bacon first. See here. A best before date is printed on the packaging, and that's still another 4 days away. And the spinach, it's okay. It's wilting a little, but it'd make a good spinach omelet. And the eggs. He brought out the carton, checking the best before date on the end of it, nodding, putting everything on the counter. Then he leaned against the counter and crossed his arms over his chest. Go for it. She looked at him nervously. I haven't prepped. No prep required. No videos to watch. Just go by memory. She wrinkled her nose at him as she stepped forward. Are you trying to put me on the spot? No, he said. I'm trying to get food. It's been a very long day. She laughed and got started. Since he had stopped by to lift her bed frame and ended up moving that bookshelf as well, it was the least she could do.